All right. Hi, everybody. David Fogel back with you, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, back with another Symphonina Foundation podcast. And today I am joined by my friend, jazz legend and guitarist, Peter Sprague. Peter, how are you?
Doing great, thanks.
You'd be doing greater if the surf were up this morning, I'm sure.
Well, you're right. That's another whole part of my life that I treasure.
It is. And it's one I wish I could get back to, as we were talking about just before we get started. I used to surf, and there's an old saying about who's the best surfer. It's the one having the most fun. So,
Yeah.
I think on most days I would bet you're the best surfer. So,
Oh, that's nice.
hey, back in 2017, we had a total eclipse of the sun in America. And one of my friends, who's a editor for Sky and Telescope magazine, Bob King, suggested that after I see it, and it was like life-altering experience for me, that I write some symphony music for it. And I did that, and I had a mock-up of it, and you and a couple other people, Kevin Latau and maybe a few others I'm forgetting, encouraged me to get some live players to record it. So that was
Hmm.
really my introduction, meeting you at your Sprakeland studio there at Encinitas. And it all came out just great. And while we were doing that and recording with string players and woodwind players, by the way, Peter, that piece that we made played in I think 42 planetariums around the world for about a year after that. So
Neat.
it was
Did you
great.
become a rich man from that?
I did not. I did get my first music award in my life doing that though. So
Nice.
it was rich in other ways. But anyway, we were talking about orchestral recordings and compositions, and of course, I've known you as a jazz guitarist. That's from the 1990s when I started playing jazz at the Catamaran, and all the jazz players of that day. There was you, David Benoit, the Rippingtons, all those guys.
Hmm.
But you mentioned to me you had composed a guitar concerto for the San Diego Symphony. And I think we have a Back to the Future moment now, because 20 years later, we have your album Width of the World, and you've returned to it. And I wanted to give the spotlight to you to tell us about that album and your experience maybe from 20 years ago and where it is now.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so 20 years ago, I got a commission from the San Diego Symphony Orchestra to write a guitar concerto. And so I took about 2 months off to write the piece. It's in three movements. It was when I did the mock-up in the composing, I did a MIDI mock-up of it. I met with the conductor. He looked at the piece. He said, "Yeah, you're looking good." He suggested a few things. This was Jung Ho Pak, and he said maybe delete this section. That he gave me a few items of direction. I then got the parts written out. We rehearsed. That was the start of what was a tough reality. The piece is kind of complicated. I mean, kind of challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And the when we rehearsed two times. And in the first rehearsal, so I was on the bill with Mark O'Connor, the great fiddle player, and he has written some orchestral music, and another guy that was a local San Diego composer, Bruce Donnelly, very brilliant composer. They both so our three pieces were on the docket for the concert. In the rehearsal time is so tight for an orchestra. They're getting paid by the minute. They're super
Mm-hmm.
strict about timing, and there's a lot of union sort of at play, union kind of things like you can't go over and you need a break now.
Yep.
And it was disheartening for me because the piece in the first rehearsal, we didn't even make it through the whole piece. We ran out of time. And it wasn't that my piece took all that extra time. They just had not a lot of time, allotted enough time for the three different pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So then we met the next day, which was the concert day, and did some more rehearsal, but it was still just like, wow, are we going to perform this with how together it is not?
Yeah.
No, I have to say one thing, it comes together pretty good for that amount of rehearsal. They're brilliant musicians, but it just requires more to really pull it off. So we performed it. I got a bootleg recording of it that is of very terrible quality, but at least I could hear what was going on. And it was not a great performance. There was just some things that were just, I wouldn't have wanted to put it out at that in that stage. Now, I cannot I cannot put full blame on the lack of rehearsal because my composing too, I learned one really important thing that when you do a mock-up and you say have the melody being played by the flutes, and you've got brass involved, forget it. It's just not going to happen. So what I learned since then is that balances are super important, and the balances, like a volume control for certain instruments, needs to be built in to the instruction of the score.
Yeah.
And so some of the balances were off. With rehearsal, I think we could have, I could have said less brassy or omit brassy or given direction like that, but we were sort of on a survival mode. So anyway, that was how that got left off. That was 20 years ago. It had always been in my mind to revisit the piece and get it sort of played the way I wanted it to. So it took all the way up until about 4 or 5 months ago for me to kind of block off some time
Yeah.
to do that. So I took 3 months. I didn't think it would take 3 months, but it took me 3 months. First was sort of some like DNA kind of exploratory mission to find the original score, to get the score. I had some original files from doing the MIDI. I actually hired a guy in LA. There's a company in LA. They do sort of forensic audio. And also, like, they took my old version of Pro Tools and I couldn't even open it up anymore. They took that and they have this room full of old
Wow.
computers and tape
Okay.
machines. And
Okay.
they with those kind of programs, he opened it up in an early version of Pro Tools and then kept measuring up to the current version. So
Yeah.
the first month was sort of a lot of that work. Then I ran into a guy in LA named John Parker, who's a very good arranger, and I had done some work with him before and got sort of some impetus and guidance from him to get started on doing a mock-up of myself because he himself, John Parker, has done some things where he hires the Budapest Studio Orchestra, which I know you know about,
Yep.
um, hired them, and stuff sounds great, but he said for my piece, because of the difficulty of it, it would have been 14, $15,000,
Wow.
something
Okay.
like that.
Yeah.
So because it wasn't going to happen, it would be multiple days
Mm.
and anyway, so he said, "Man, maybe you should try doing a mock-up." So he suggested I use a software library called Cinematic Studio
Yeah.
Strings,
Uh-huh.
and I ran into kind of got to know those guys. They're from in Australia. Did a lot of learning about how to these mock-ups, and then I augmented it with some real strings. There was a solo bassoon part, so
Mhm.
I had a real bassoonist from here in
It sounds
town.
great, by the way, Peter.
Oh, thank
I was
you.
just re-listening this morning. It sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So anyway, I use real bass, real drums,
Hmm.
real trumpet. The rest was the samples from Cinematic Studio Strings, and I use their woodwind library and their brass library, and then I used a percussion library called Strike One or something like that, but it had been recommended, and that was much more simple because there isn't so many dynamics at play and such. But anyway, kind of finished it, put it out, got some nice interest. The biggest thing for it is that I get to hear it the way I've always wanted to hear it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the story of where the piece came from and how it had ended up getting released about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And so you recorded the live players in your Sprigland studio there in
Yep,
Encinitas?
yep. I recorded the bass and drums at the same time. I have in my studio, I have a lot of different rooms so I can separate them.
Yep.
And then when I recorded the string, I had a Bridget Dolkus, who's a really great violinist. I had her come over and she did violin one and violin two parts.
Hmm.
She did like three passes on each one. Then I had a fellow from LA named Rudy Stein, a cellist. He did three passes of the cello part. A gal named Pam Jacobson played viola, and then contrabass I used just samples because there
Got it.
wasn't a lot of movement and just sort of holding down the roots of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So Bridget and Rudy, I remember both played on Path of
Yes,
Totality. And I
yes,
think Travis Merrill played on
yes.
my viola. But yeah, that was great working with them. Good to hear that they're still active. That's
They
excellent.
are doing really great,
That's
sounding
good.
good.
Maybe I'll have an opportunity to get them on a podcast sometime and we'll see what they're up to in their world.
Neat.
when you're recording those different parts, it's very similar to what I do for the International Symphonina Orchestra.
Hmm.
So we do record with Budapest scoring for our albums, and we have like tracks, I should say, three symphoninas of different movements from Budapest scoring on our Ascension Symphonina Rising album this year. But we also have one from the International Symphonina Orchestra where I go and I get 40 different players from around the world to record
Ah,
separately, and then I do all the mixing to get them in tune, in time, and with the right dynamics. And I know you appreciate going note by note. It takes some time and effort to do that, but we do that and it turns out great. And I think what you've done is doing that great too. In your studio setup, when you're having Bridget play multiple tracks for violin one, for example, do you go through the effort of having her sit in different places, or do you take care of that panning thing in your studio that the
yeah,
instrument
I
goes on?
was going to do that, and she actually was. We were thinking of doing sort of different violins too for
Yeah.
different parts. But once we got into it, it was so involved that I didn't do that.
Okay.
And I did do a little bit of panning with her.
Hmm.
I I really it was one thing that was interesting when I first started out. I said, this is not a real orchestra, so I don't really need to adhere to the traditional panning of an orchestra. So I kind of experimented with it because there's a thing when doing like pop music, not strings, but like just background vocals, for example. There's a thing where let's say you have two different parts, but you do doubles on them. Does that
Right.
make sense? So
Yeah.
so
Uh-huh.
each part gets doubled. And a kind of a cool sound that I've come with, and I don't think I've invented this, but I do it. You can see my hands. You could have one part of it be there, one part of it be there, and that does a thing. But there's a really cool effect of saying the lead vocal or the part one, but one that's higher because I find that having the lower part. Okay, let's start with the lower part. The
Hmm.
lower part it gets doubled. Have it very wide like
Okay.
that. So that's and
Peter's
then
got his hands left and right here for those of them
yes,
playing at
really
home.
wide left,
Yeah.
right. And then much more narrow
Hmm.
would be the top part, the higher pitched
Okay.
one. And that does this cool chorus, kind of a poppy sound. And it's a lot of times when it's harmony rather than one part doing different things, it's more effective or it's at least an option. So I sort of explored that a little bit with
Hmm.
the orchestra, but then I ultimately came back to the traditional panning. I just felt like I don't know. I did experiment a lot, but it just came back that that sounded better. So when I did the panning with the live people, I panned them the same, and the three different parts of them, just a touch separated from each other
Uh-huh. Yeah.
to give that sense.
Well, now you have your positive feedback and you have your score, probably in Sibelius or some other
It's in
notation.
finale, yeah,
Finale. Okay.
and that's a whole nother
That
discussion
is
because
another discussion. That's
everyone's
true.
jumping ship.
Yeah, that's true. So it'll be in Dorico eventually. That's fine. But now that you have it, do you have any desire to pursue having a full symphony orchestra perform it?
Yeah, I would love to. Now, the few things about I would have to do a little bit more cleaning up of the score because the score was actually back 20 years ago was in Finale, and I had it. So I didn't. It wasn't hand copied. It was all on the computer. So
Yeah.
it's still in Finale, but there would still have to be some fixing and updating from what the recording. Because a lot of times the recordings when I did it, I that would part would be neat if I changed that a little bit.
Mhm.
So I didn't really update the score. So there would be need to be that. But the biggest obstacle, David, would be just to could I get an orchestra that would want to do it that could afford to have some extra rehearsal time.
Right.
It's a big hurdle. I could do the Budapest Orchestra, but I don't. I just think, and then would I record I probably would record the rhythm section if I did it with them
Hmm.
here and the guitar parts here and that kind
Hmm.
of thing, and then go there just to do the orchestral part.
Yeah.
But anyway, if some windfall of money comes,
There you
I
go.
might do that. But ultimately, it'd be really fun to play it live somewhere. I'd love to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And have video of it.
Yeah,
one of the nice things about recording with Budapest scoring is you can get the videographer to do that recording as
I
we've done.
remember that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it turns out great. But they're an option. I'd be happy to explore that with you further sometime. What do you have going on now? What's up the rest of this year into 2026?
Yeah, well, I still am doing a fair amount of gigs. I do play a lot with a trio, myself, guitar, a pianist, and a bassist. We do a ton of little concerts, and then bigger things. We're gonna play one of those trio concerts in November. There's a really great, and you probably know about it, this performance space in La Jolla called the Conrad
Oh yeah.
Theater.
Yep.
We're gonna do one concert with a trio in November, and then in December we have this program that this is probably the fourth year we've done it, but around Christmas time, I did an album and also the arrangements of Charlie Brown Christmas music. Vince Guaraldi was the composer,
Mhm.
and I did my own arrangements of that, and it's turned into sort of a tradition where this year we're going to do 2 nights at the Conrad and one night out at a theater in Fallbrook. That's a town for those that don't live around here. That's a town inland up north.
It is, yes.
So we're going to do some of that. And then on the recording front, I'm really active with doing more projects of my own. So I've done one Beatles record where we take Beatles songs and I do special arrangements to them. That was called Day Tripper, and then we're going to release one right after Christmas called All You Need Is Love, and it was been recorded and right now, and we taped it, so I'm going to show you my screen.
Okay.
I'm going through Final Cut Pro.
Oh yeah. Okay. Everybody, homie, he's showing me the results of the video here. It's great. Yeah, yeah. Well, Peter, we have a lot of Beatles fans in our audience. We do. A lot of
Neat,
symphonic fans are also Beatles fans. It's true.
neat. Well, David, at some point, I'd love to talk to you to hear about your experience working with the Budapest Orchestra, because that's
Yeah.
something that I'd love to hear your version of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've recorded at least 6 times with them now, over three
Okay.
years, so maybe seven. I'd have, you start to lose track, but
Well, let
I
me
do have
ask
a
you
lot of,
this.
yeah, sure.
Do you go over there in person while they're recording?
Now we've done everything by Zoom using audio movers, listen to. So
Okay.
you get the live feed from their room, and that has worked totally fine. I
Okay.
would say if you want to fly to Budapest and enjoy their presence, I would love to. But
Yeah.
just most times we've thought logistically, can I do that and keep doing with everything else that I need to do in a week? And the answer's been no. But
Yeah.
but it's worked out just fine.
Who prepares the scores?
Yep. So we have a person on our team, Chris Prather. He's out in Oklahoma, and he does everything exactly the way they need it to be in their A3, A4 paper. And of course,
Okay.
we do a score review internally before we send it to them, because the analogy for me is you're launching a rocket ship, and basically, once the rocket goes, as Danae told me one time, you can make course adjustments, but you can only do course adjustments. You can't really change where it's going. So
Yeah.
you have that. So you want to make sure everything is as good as you can make it before you go, and kind of think
Yeah.
through how everything's going to be played. And especially, I think in your situation, if you have some parts that are more complicated or whatever, you want to think about what's the best way to get the result you want.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah.
everything's been very good with them, and I'm happy to be of any assistance that I can.
Yeah. Here's one last question. How
Of
long
course.
are they pretty quick at pulling it together?
Yes. So usually when we record, being that we're well behind them in the time zones, when we're up early in the morning to record with them, by the afternoon, we've got all the recordings back to us, or the next day, never later than that. And
Yeah.
then I do all the mixing. I can't say all the mixing. I do the majority of the mixing on the mixes that we've released. This
Hmm.
this particular year, one of the recordings, Jordan Janosko did her own mixing. Turned out great also.
Hmm.
But I'd be happy to show you how that all goes. And you've done a million mixes in your life, so
Yeah,
or
but
you can ask them to do it if you want to, or give it to
yeah.
anybody else. That's fine too.
Well, they did send me a diagram because I did work with I mentioned this fellow John Parker. Well, he did the arranging for a composition and they recorded it with the Budapest. And they sent me the files to mix,
Mhm.
and they I just thought, man, and it was just an orchestra. It wasn't an orchestra with a jazz rhythm section.
Yeah.
So they sent me a a sort of panning scheme, I guess is what
Uh-huh.
it was. And
Yep.
I couldn't make sense out of it. So I said, Get them to mix it," because they do that
Yep.
all the time. And the mixes sounded fantastic. But like, do you understand their panning scheme of all the different mics and
We do. We do. But I'll say too, I know Jordan put more time into trying that as a baseline for her mix this year, and it turned out great. Generally, for me, what I found is that if I just pan it logically, like I know where the mics are approximately,
Mhm.
that I can tune it to the way I want it. Tune is not the right word, but design it the way that I feel sounds good. And
Right.
whether that matches anybody's design spec of where the mics actually were, in my view, at that point becomes irrelevant because it's what you're listening to that
Yeah.
matters, you know?
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Well, one other question.
Yeah.
They have like how did you just experiment with how much of room mics would be in there and that
Mhm.
kind of thing?
Yeah. So you get, let me think if I remember correctly here. You get the deca tree, left, center, and right. You get outside mics, left and right, both front and back. And you get surround mics. I think there's two on each side. So that makes two, four, like nine or so room mics. And then
Okay.
you have spot mics on top of different sections, like four violins at a time, and two woodwinds at a time, and two brass at a time, give or take. And so
Okay.
you can get that general mix the way you want. You know, I have different approaches on mixes that I've done where I've started with spot mics and added room mics. I've started with room mics and added spot mics. Generally, I
Okay.
find adding the spot mics to the room mics works more efficiently.
It
Get
sounds like that. Yeah.
get the room mic, get the room sounding right first is what tends to work better for me. But I wouldn't say if someone else who's mixing has a different approach that they're, that they're wrong or something. Whatever works for you to get the result you want in the end.
Right, right.
Yep.
Oh, that's so neat. Well, what a great experience, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what, Peter, before we sign up, I want to say, we were after that Path of Totality recording that we did, and that did very well. I was working on a jazz piece for an app that I was working on. It's called Color Butler. It's something that helps colorblind men, of which I'm not, but 8% of the world's men are, figure out what
Okay.
clothes they want to wear because they can't see what colors they're wearing. And we had a tune that I composed. It was a sax tune. So we had my teacher Jim Weiss, who we both know,
Yep,
come
yep.
and record there. And we went through, and after Jim left, we were doing some post production. And then at the end of that, I played you something new, which was my Symphonina number 1. This is 2018.
I remember that.
I'm glad you do. So it was the mock up, and I didn't know whether you were going to like it or not like it. But I'll tell you three things that were important. One is that you listened, you listened to the whole thing.
Yeah.
You didn't stop me in the middle and go, okay, that's enough, right? And then you said, you could explore recording this with live orchestra back in Eastern Europe, like with Budapest or maybe the Czech Republic. I remember you saying that too. But the most important thing was you really gave me some good encouragement to keep
Oh,
doing it. And I was making a point to somebody yesterday, that when you're starting with a new idea and you have this vision of changing the world as part of this idea, it's really important to get positive feedback when you're starting, unless it's crazy, in which case they're doing you a favor to say, no, that's crazy. But
oh.
if you had said like, no, no, that's like, that's not a good idea. I don't know whether I would have stopped or something, probably not, but I really do appreciate the encouragement that you gave. And so I kept going, and I've written 12 or 13 of them now. But more importantly, we founded the Symphonina Foundation. It's a 501c3. We've had 3 albums. 2 of them made Billboard. As you can see behind me, one made #1 last year.
Yeah.
There have been more than 80 symphoninas written by other people from around the world in the last 3 years. And, I just thank you for all that
Oh.
encouragement at the beginning. It was very important.
Well, you have a talent. I could hear it, and you had the motivation to go through the process to make it happen, and that's so cool. Well, I'm glad I was nice.
I am too. Peter,
And
yeah, go ahead.
and I'm sincere. I wasn't just doing it to be nice. I'm glad that I gave it the time. I mean, I aim to live that way, the way that you just described.
I appreciate that, and that's true. Peter, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
The best way is I have a website, www.petersprague.com, And Sprague is like the country Prague with an S in front of it.
That's true. Okay. Peter, we're going to listen to some more of your great music on the way out. And as I say to everybody, but I mean it every single time, if there's anything that I can do to be of help to you, just let me know.
Okay. Well, I'll stay in touch, and thanks so much for having me.